All right, LMEA, welcome. It's great to be with all of you today. My name is Chris Kaatz. I'm the Assistant Director of Bands at Stephen F. Austin State University, and I am joined by my colleague, Paulette Tomlinson.
Hi, I'm Paulette Tomlinson, and I am the Director of Fine Arts at Nacogdoches ISD in Nacogdoches, Texas. So yeah, we're really excited to be here and present this to you. We've been working on it for a while, and we think that it's really great information that you're going to find very useful.
So let's jump in. Our presentation today is about interpretive decisions, which we've entitled Pass the Baton to the Student. So our goal with today's presentation is we are going to try to give you some strategies for creating independent music making abilities within your students, giving them license to make interpretive decisions on their own so that you can create more music with your students than you would ordinarily be able to if you're the one having to make every decision in the classroom. So you're going to pass the interpretive baton to the members of your ensemble. So we wanted to start with this quote by Leonard Bernstein. Music can name the unnameable and communicate the unknowable. So that's kind of the goal with this presentation, is that we don't want to just help you forge better ideas about how you can be a great musician, but help your students understand how to cultivate great musicianship on their own. So odds are, if you were to give this score right here to your students, they would look at this and think that this was pretty bland and not have a lot of ideas about how you would go about adding creative musicianship to this. There's piano, the rhythm's pretty simple, it's not terribly complex from an articulation standpoint, and the tempo's pretty moderate. So if you look at this, you may think, oh, this is a pretty simple, maybe even boring piece of music. But when you actually listen to it, which we're going to give you a chance to do right now, you may recognize that this is a pretty profound piece of art. And here is an excerpt of that score, conducted by Bernstein himself. Now, while we would love to sit here and listen to that whole thing, we have a lot of information that we want to cover with you. So we're going to jump back into the presentation. But if we go ahead and look at that score, that takes on a completely different meaning once you hear it. It's an extremely expressive piece of music. And for those of you at home, you probably recognize that as the slow movement of Beethoven's 7. If any of you were a music geek like me and really loved that, a particular movement of that piece and saw the King's Speech in theaters not that long ago, you might have freaked out and be like, oh yeah, that's Beethoven's 7, that's great. I love that. And I think it's an outrageously expressive piece. It's beautiful, it's hauntingly wonderful. But if you look at the score, it's really simplistic. But right, there's a lot of music that can be made out of it, as Beethoven, or as Bernstein just proved with that orchestra.
All right, so can expression be taught? I know as a young teacher, I thought it was like, you know, you had to have a sort of je ne sais quoi to be able to teach expression, and it was this big mystery. But, you know, as I got better at teaching and I learned from my mentors, you know, some students do have like an inherent ability, and that's probably because they've grown up listening to music, they've got access to high quality opportunities to listen to music in the home, and so they already kind of have an idea of how something might sound or how it should sound or be expressed. But then we've got, you know, our students who like to have rules, and they like to have things, you know, very organized and well thought out, maybe more calculated. And so we actually can teach our kids how to be expressive through a set of objective laws that we're going to share with you today. And then the great thing is once the students understand the laws and they know them back and front, they can start to hypothesize. Thank you, Bloom's taxonomy. They can start to hypothesize what kind of expression they might, want to try in their music. And this is both in the ensemble setting, as well as with solo work. That's going to help them be better at solo and ensemble because they can think independently. And then the great thing for you is you can collaborate with them. So it's way more fun because you can get the kids' ideas, and sometimes they teach you stuff, and you're like, well, I never thought about doing it that way, but I like that, and that's how we're going to do it. So it just makes them more independent, and it makes them a more collaborative process. And then that frees up so much time for you to truly be expressive with them and to make some really great music, because you're not the one having to micromanage every single note.
Absolutely. So I would wager that most of us got into music education because we had really profound musical moments when we were in high school, middle school. Maybe it was an elementary school general music teacher that got us motivated and inspired us to want to commit our lives to this profession. And 40 plus years of a teaching career to teaching music to students and creating musical moments with them. And odds are that the musical moments that we create with our students are the thing that keeps them coming back to orchestra, choir, or band, or whatever, or even the general music classroom, whatever it is that we teach. It's the creating of artistic, enriching experiences that are probably bringing our students in. I have yet to meet the student that hops out of bed eager to come to my classroom because they just can't wait to lower their third in a major chord when tuning to make sure that it locks in just intonation. Maybe that kid is out there, but I haven't met them yet. Most of them, it's because of the enriching artistic experiences that they have creating musical moments with their peers and their teachers. That get them coming back. So our goal with this whole presentation is that you're giving your students objective tools to facilitate strong subjective experiences. And this is a virtuous cycle that the more artistic they can be in rehearsal, the more enjoyment they're going to get out of the activity. And then the more they're going to want to work hard to create these subjective, meaningful experiences. And then that's just going to feed itself, and your program is going to grow exponentially. Absolutely. Both in terms of numbers and depth of artistry that your students are able to give to the audience and each other.
All right, so we're going to get into some pretty high level thinking today with these laws, and in order to do that, we've got to have some fundamental, knowledge already established in our classroom. So we call these the prerequisites. I'm not going to go through and read them all to you, but these are the common sense things, the things that your students need to know what your expectations are. As they get to rehearsal every day. And so, we've got to always make sure that we're breathing, taking a musician's breath, right? Where we have to support our air. If you're singing or if you're playing a wind instrument, you've got to play in tone. You've got to play with a beautiful characteristic tone quality. And that ensures that you're in tune. Having a pencil, because a lot of this stuff, we've got to write down, notes in our music. There's no way we're going to remember all of this on our own. So the kids need to have a pencil every day, using proper bow hold, vocal technique, etc. So whatever the fundamentals are that you need, that you have established in your classroom, we got to make sure that everybody knows what to do before we can get into these laws. But once you have this, then these should be really easy to add on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we would encourage you, there may be some of these that are more accessible to younger, more beginning students. And we would urge you to try at least a few of these even if the students are in a very fundamental stage of their learning with their musicianship.
Yeah, for sure.
So when should you do this? We suggest that the way you start introducing these laws would be at the beginning of rehearsal during any type of warm-up sequence that you might do with your group. So maybe you take a few minutes at the beginning of rehearsal, you choose an excerpt or an exercise, and you pick 1, 2, maybe 3 if you feel really comfortable with the idea of introducing these laws. Maybe pick 1 to 3 of these and show your students how that law, explain what it is, and then show how it applies to the particular fundamental exercise. And then as you continue to cultivate these exercises and the laws, and the students begin to understand what they mean, you can then show direct application in your repertoire to these musical laws. So for example, you might be in a spot in the repertoire and ask your students, okay, which one of the laws that we covered in our warm-up routine a few minutes ago would apply to this section of the music? And then you can get them involved. The more leading questions you can use, the more that moves them from being a passive learner to an active learner. And then you can even have them write that in their music and start to apply these laws. And if you make a habit of doing this most days, it will start to become second nature to your students, and it's going to open up more questions for them to ask themselves about, like, okay, how should I be phrasing this? What tools do I have in my tool belt that my teacher has given me to make this artistic and go beyond the ink on the page? So we also suggest that maybe you take 2 or 3 of these and focus on them during a week, so that you're using multiple exercises, multiple sections of your repertoire that you can apply these different laws to, and then that will really get them ingrained. But like a wise mentor teacher of mine once told me, good teachers teach everything all the time. So as you introduce new laws, make sure that you're constantly reminding your students of the old laws. And
one thing you can do is provide them with a list of the laws. That's what I always did. And you know, they can have it as a reference to refer back, and you can, you know, my kids would get to the point where they would just put like law number 3, and they'd know, okay, I know what law number 3 is. So, and you write it above their music, you know, and they can refer back to it. And before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and share the handout. So if you look on the files tab within your window, that is available to y'all, so you can open it up and follow along with us if you'd like. We got provided some scores in there and a list of the laws for you to take home with you. But so the things that we recommend that you might use to start teaching these things and to continue to reinforce them, scale exercises are really good. So the big thing here is we want material that the kids can play without, or sing without having to think too hard about the technique. All right. So we want things that are second nature so that we can focus on the higher level thinking of being expressive and making music and being artistic. So scale exercises are great. We're going to talk a little about those within some of the laws. Unison etudes are very good because you can hear everybody doing the same thing. And then that way the tubas get to play something just as great as the flutes, or, you know, the basses get to play something just as exciting as the violins. There's some free ones. The friend of mine, John McAllister, he has free unison etudes. They're awesome. So check those out. You can use your circle of fourths and scale degrees and create some chord exercises if we're working on something, you know, to do with some harmony. Classic 16 Chorales by J.S. Bach. Okay, that one's definitely a classic. Perfect opportunity to practice a lot of these things. The Blue Book, we call it the Blue Book here in Texas, but that is Foundations for Superior Performance, is another great book, chock full of stuff that you can use. My personal favorite, the exercises that when I was thinking about these laws and starting to create them, I was using Tone Studies by James Kernow. I think there are 2 of them now, but I use the original one. It's a really inexpensive set of just great pieces of music, but they're like 16 measures long. So, you know, and they're technically very easy, but there's a ton of stuff in it. Like you can use all these laws in Tone Studies. Or another personal favorite to do is like music well below the level of your students. So if you have, you know, like when I had a grade 4 band here in Texas, we would play like a grade 1, it's called A Song for Friends. And it was super easy, but then we could talk about all the musical stuff. And then it kind of just turned into we called it like your heart song, you know, it's your song that it's a memory because we played it so often, and it's pretty, and we made it very musical, and they, you know, they have the goosebump moments. But yeah, something super easy that they don't have to use a whole lot of brain power for technique, where they can use the brain power for expression. And then finally, you can apply all this stuff to your concert music. Absolutely. And to go off of Paulette's idea about having a more technically simple piece of music that you can start to really apply these laws to, I would suggest that every program that you do with your students, that you maybe have one piece on the program that's a bit below their technical ability level, so that they can get in and start to make music out of it on the first time through the piece. And that's going to boost their confidence and make it much easier for you to translate a lot of the musical ideas you're doing in that piece to the other repertoire that may be more challenging for them from a technical standpoint. Yeah. So let's jump in
to the laws, and we'll go through these a little bit quickly, give you a little information on what the law is, maybe a practical way to apply it. And then after we do a series of these, we're going to have an activity that gives you a chance to apply multiple laws, so you can see how this would work in a rehearsal setting. So the first one is, if you can sing it, you can play it. And I'm a firm believer that the more you can encourage audiation amongst your students, the better. So those of you that are teaching instrumental students, I think that it's really beneficial for you to have them sing in class as much as possible. If you don't do this regularly, your students may be a bit apprehensive to this, and remind them, hey, we're not in choir down, which is down the hall, where I want you to try to sing and be expressive, but we're more doing this so you can get an oral image of the piece. And I think in a vocal setting, this is great if you can have your students be solfeging, if you can get them to sight read the music, and that's going to give them a stronger internal image of the piece. And even if you do clarify it for them on a keyboard or other pitch reference, means of pitch reference, I think it's great to have them at least try to discover the oral image of the piece, and in all of that through a sight singing means before. So the more that you can get them to sing, I think this helps with intonation. I've seen this help groups in terms of understanding individual parts. It's going to help with pitch accuracy, especially for brass players, for any of those in the chat that work with brass players. And string players, it's going to definitely help them understand what pitch they need to be aiming for and allow them to adjust much quicker. So we would suggest that you obviously start, maybe even scales is a good place to start with this, because most students are going to have a high degree of accuracy singing a major scale. So that's gonna work well. And then maybe eventually that goes towards singing articulations to unify those as a group, singing different exercises that you'll do in your daily drill, sight singing things, and eventually you're singing portions of your repertoire together.
All right. So young teachers, young students, we sometimes, when we're talking about notes, we always want to think about the beginning of the note, right? And the way we're articulating the note. However, we have to remember that all notes have a beginning, middle, and end. And if we take that much care with each note, that we know exactly what the beginning, the middle, and the end is going to look and sound like and feel like, then we're going to be able to interpret our articulations much better. So what you want to do is in fundamentals, you want to be really specific about what the beginning, the middle, and the end is. Here's an example: an accented note. We have a strong front, and then it's got a baby decrescendo middle, and then a tapered end. So one thing we can do is make a chart, and you can have a chart and you can write the different articulations, and then have a beginning, middle, and end. And then the students as a class will go through, it's like a graphic organizer. There you go for your evaluation. So you can check that little box off. And have the students fill in, okay, the beginning of an accent looks like this, the middle of an accent looks like this, the end of the accent looks like this, and then they have that reference to look at as well. And anyway, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh, and my lights. What is going on here? All right, sorry. Apparently we timed out. So yeah, if you do these default articulations, then, from there you can kind of adjust them as needed, like within your music, because you're not always going to do an accent the same way, you're not always going to do a staccato the same way. But if the students know what like the default is, then it's much easier for you to get them to the next level.
Absolutely. So next, never let the music flatline. It's really easy, I think, with students, unless you're guiding them towards a specific phrase shape, for them just to play everything at a constant dynamic. So one of my teachers would call this, you don't want to ever have your groups play at mezzo suck. You want to have dynamic shaping throughout the line as you're going. So I think a really simple way to do this with students at the beginning is asking them, all right, if measures 1 through 8 are a phrase, which one note are we aiming towards? Which one note are we moving towards and arriving at, and then moving away from for the rest of the phrase? Maybe you start a dialogue with your students and they give you some options, and then you as the conductor get to clarify where that goal note is. But have them circle that, write that on their part, and then have them lead to that note and then come away from it after they arrive at that note. And I think that's a really simple way that you can achieve this in an ensemble setting.
All right, so now speaking of phrasing, one really easy place to start, especially with young students, is we call it up is up, down is down. All right. And basically all that means is as notes ascend, you can crescendo, and as notes descend, you can decrescendo. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be the end all be all for phrasing, but it is a really good place to start and get kids thinking about that. It's a rule that we can try. And so they can start to add direction to their phrases. The way I would practice this is with a scale. As you go up the scale, you crescendo when you get to tonic at the top. That should be the peak of your phrase, of your scale. Mm-hmm. And then as you come back down, then you decrescendo, and they can start to do that. And up is up, down is down. It really does work in a lot of places. So yeah, that's an easy one.
And I think a fantastic thing as we're talking about phrase direction, which is sort of higher order thinking, if we're thinking back to Bloom's taxonomy, mm-hmm. is as you have students aim for higher, more artistic, subjective, musical goals, what often happens is that pitch improves, tone quality improves, rhythmic stability and sense of rhythmic momentum improves. Students inherently have to listen and think at a deeper level, so their note shapes are probably going to be more unified. They're going to pay more attention to dynamics. It's incredible, and I'm sure many of you in the room have experienced this. When you get your students to chase after a musical goal, a lot of times all the other technical things that you're trying to address with the group improve, and sometimes are completely resolved just by getting them to focus on something that's higher order mm-hmm. thinking.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The next law we want to talk about is augmented rhythms move forward. So what we mean by augmented rhythms, there's kind of two categories. One, you have dotted or tied notes, so rhythms that are augmented by some sort of extension of their basic rhythmic value. And in this case, like tied notes, you would want to crescendo through the tie. A dotted rhythm, if it's longer than kind of like a dotted quarter versus a quarter, crescendoing through that note is probably going to make musical sense. And then another type of augmented rhythm, the second type, would be if you have a melody and it becomes rhythmically augmented. Oftentimes students will stagnate in those sorts of situations because it feels really slow to them, because the music is half the speed or maybe 4 times slower. But if you get the musicians to move much farther forward through that and give a sense of crescendoing direction, it typically helps to improve the momentum of the line. So a really easy way that you can do this is by creating some sort of rhythmic etude. And any time that the students have an augmented rhythm, so it's a tie, it's a dot, you have them do a little crescendo. You could even, if they're in the beginning stages of doing this, have them draw little crescendi underneath their augmented rhythms and have them try this. And you and they will probably be shocked at how much more musical it sounds if they mm-hmm. just add a little micro crescendo under any rhythm that is augmented.
All right, now next we need to make sure that we're all marking our phrases in our parts. I'm sure you've heard kids play, a beautiful phrase and it's awesome, we're going, and then at the end they just kind of clip it off and they don't quite finish it, they don't follow through. So if we mark it and we know clearly where the beginning, the middle, the end, the peak of the phrase, that's going to make them more aware and know that they need to complete those phrases. So this is a fun thing for you to do with the students, and you can ask them what they think. All right, let's look at this phrase. Where do we think the phrase peak is? And one of them might say beat 1 and measure 4. Let's try it. And so we'll play it. All right, what do we think, guys? And have everybody kind of hypothesize. You might try a few, and if they get to the right answer, great. If not, then you as the director can let them know where the peak of the phrase should be, and then we should mark it. This is also, there's a method, and Chris is way more familiar with it than I am. When we were planning this, he brought it up, and I was like, oh, it's perfect. And I don't want to mess up the name, so you say it, Chris.
So there's a well-known oboist named Marcel Tabateau, who was in the Philadelphia Orchestra for years and taught at Curtis. And what he would do is he would have his students mark in every phrase in their part a number 1 through 10 on every single note in the phrase. And 1 would be the softest dynamic they had available to them. 10 would be the loudest dynamic they had available to them. And every note had to have a different individual number on it. And what was really interesting is that people would talk about how Tabateau students had extremely expressive phrasing, when really all Tabateau was getting his students to do was, okay, look at the phrase, analyze it, and make a decision about the overall growth of the phrase and how much you need to increase your dynamic between each pitch. And the end result was this perceived high level of expressivity, but it ended up, the approach was actually really kind of objective and you might even say sterile, but it created really expressive playing. So you can have the left brain and right brain ideas oftentimes work together. I think frequently our students believe that phrasing is this mystical art where you have to go up on a mountaintop and light incense candles and do some sort of dance, you know, to appease the phrasing gods and the wisdom will be imparted to them, when really they can just look at a phrase, make some decisions and try some things, and it will end up sounding quite expressive to them.
It's like musical Sudoku.
Yes, yeah. So this is a concept a lot of you are also probably familiar with, having students listen to trios. And what we mean by trios is, if you look at this picture, these three students are in a trio. So the oboist in the middle, he is listening to the oboist on his left and the flutist on his right as his trio. And if you have your students try to use this concept to blend their sound, to work on balance, to work on kind of interacting in a chamber music way with the people on either side of them, all of these trios in each row of your ensemble will interlock, and it allows the students to take in a smaller amount of information, think more locally, but if all of these trios interlock, that it's going to create this really cohesive, deep level of listening for the entire ensemble. And of course, this idea can be expanded to a quintet, so you could have the people on either side of you and either direction of you. You could expand it to a nonet, so the people diagonal from you as well. And it's a really interesting concept, and it helps students sort of filter their listening in a much easier way. So we're going to take a moment and we're going to jump in. We have this excerpt, My Country, 'Tis of Thee, and we're going to give you a chance to review the laws that we just covered and think about where specifically in this score the different laws would apply. So we'll give you a moment to do that. And as you find spots where you're like, oh, hey, this law would apply to this section of the piece, go ahead and drop it in the chat, or you can even raise your hand to speak. We would love to get some of you on video to share your ideas about that. So just take a moment to apply those laws and think through this. And as you come up with ideas, pop them in the chat, raise your hand to speak. I'm not sure if we're getting anybody in the chat or anybody speaking, but we'll just throw out a couple of ideas here. So augmented rhythms move forward. The second bar is a fantastic opportunity to utilize that, and that pops up several times within this little piece. The fourth bar is a great example of that. Anytime you get the dotted quarter, crescendoing through that is a really easy way to add expression to this phrase. Paulette, you want to throw another one at him?
Yeah, this is a spot where you could use the Tapered method and decide, you know, which notes, where's the peak of our phrase, and let's make sure that every single note is a little bit of a different dynamic level, just to give it some shape, and that could really be applied in all the lines of this piece.
And combining the Tapered method with up is up, is down is down. Oftentimes, all of these melodies have an arch shape to them, so you kind of crescendo as you go up. So peaking in the third bar at the end of the third measure and the first little sub phrase, and then decrescendoing back down as you come back to the tonic chord. So
cool. Good. Well, and your handout has this excerpt, and it's got all the laws on it, and so you can go back and check it out later. And if you have any more questions at the end, we can come back to it. So let's keep going. All right. So this next one is knowing your role, and this is within your music. So students need to know what their role is within the music at all times, whether it's melody, it's harmony, your bass line, you know, what is your role in the music? And they need to mark that role in the music and on every single phrase. And then especially if it changes mid-phrase, like I know the alto saxophone, like it's so funny, they're like the hybrid of everything. So like sometimes they're the melody, and then in the middle of a phrase they're going to switch off and they're going to be bass line or something. So make sure that they're writing that in. And then also on top of that, make sure that they write in who they should be listening for. If they're harmonic material, then they need to be listening for the melodic material, making sure that they're not covering it up. You can start small with this with chorales and the tone studies that we talked about earlier. But the best way to do this is to share the score with the students. They can see it because, I mean, they can listen and that's fine. But when you can see the score, like who's got the most ink, you know, those moving notes, the melodic material, if they can see where they belong within that, then you know, it makes it a lot more clear. Oh, wow, I've got a whole note and the flutes have all this great 16th note stuff. I got to make sure I'm not covering it up. So what you can do, I did a score study project with kids. It was probably like the best teaching moment of my career. And the kids all had a copy of the score, and they went through and they had to mark things and they looked at it. And it was so fun because, you know, when you're third trumpet and we're working with the woodwinds for 15 minutes over here, you know, a couple weeks before contest, because it's getting down to the wire and you're bored, you're actually, instead of sitting there like throwing pencils at the ceiling, they're looking at the score and they're following along. And it was just awesome. So I can't recommend that highly enough, sharing it in some way, shape or form. And just so that they know what their role is.
Excellent. And this goes right on, dovetails perfectly with the score study idea, is that helping students understand that new entrances are special. So we want to highlight new entrances. If there's some new groove part that comes in, if there's a counter melody introduced, if on the second time through a section of the piece, there's new material presented, or if a section comes back, if you're doing a piece that's in rondo form, or you're doing a sonata form piece and you get to the recapitulation and there's a new melody introduced, you want to bring that out and have students make sure that they understand that and highlight that. Using something like the tone studies to practice this is an excellent example. So you can have students listen for when the color of the harmony changes, or maybe there's an orchestrational texture that the composer utilizes that's different. And that's something that you want to amplify and bring out.
All right, speaking of bringing things out, we want to bring out our altered rhythms, or sorry, our altered tones and our moving notes. And I call this boat. And I know that doesn't cover it all, but the kids remember boat and it's really easy. So we have the moving notes and other people have long ones. We want to make sure that we hear the moving ones. All right, those should be the more prominent ones, whether it's melodic or if it's some sort of ostinato. So in order to get the moving notes out, one activity you can use is to bop the beginning. So, you know, you bop the notes, you just play the attack of the note, and then you stop so that you can hear what's going on within the ensemble, other than what's, you know, on your part. That's one good way. Now, in the same vein, accidentals, if we have an accidental in the music, it's on purpose. You know, sounds like an accident, but it's actually on purpose. And usually this is because there's some sort of harmonic movement that's happening, and we need to make sure that we highlight it, because you know, there's some color change or some modal change if we might be looking at a secondary dominant or something like that, and they add the color to the chord. So we want to make sure that the accidentals are actually, you know, brought out. And with accidentals, a lot of times kids are going to shy away from them because either, you know, they might not know the fingering or the harmony might feel unfamiliar, and so we want to make sure that we are aware of that, have the students highlight it or circle it, and make sure that you rehearse them enough that the students are comfortable with the intonation of it, make sure they're comfortable with how that's going to feel, so that they do come out. One really good example is there is a beautiful like D flat in a chord in Charlie Carter's Overture for Winds. And man, I went for like months not highlighting that chord or that note, and the kid that was playing it was like a second trumpet part. She didn't know the fingering, you know, so she shied away. Man, when we had that moment where she played that thing, it changed the whole sound of the chord, and it was just incredible. So yeah, definitely make sure that we're looking. You have to look in your score and find those spots where you know that the kids might shy away and need some extra love there.
Absolutely. All right. And so our next one is change something on the repeat. So we touched on this earlier, but if there's new material presented in the repeat, that's easy. You just highlight that and bring that out. However, if there's not, which is very common in marches, you'll play the same thing twice. It's a great idea to change some sort of element. Maybe you bring the counter melody out. Maybe you make a drastic change in dynamic. Maybe you add something to the percussion part. For those of you familiar with the Sousa Band and their performance practice, it was extremely common in the Sousa Band for new musicians to come into the ensemble and veteran musicians to say, oh, hey, we don't play this part here. And on this march, we change the dynamic like this, and the percussion are going to do this here, and make sure that you play this way here. And the President's Own, in an effort to showcase this, they have started a project where they have created brand new engraved scores for all of the Sousa marches. And in addition, they have put notes in the preface to the score, but also into the score and the individual parts of performance practice decisions that the Sousa Band would make. Like maybe the trumpets are out the first time. Maybe there's a counter melody that's saved for the second time through a section. Maybe the dynamic is significantly reduced on the dogfight the second time. And they mark all of this in the parts so that you can see it and make those decisions if you want, or it gives you ideas of how you can change material in a march. They've also created a tremendous amount of reference recordings for all of these, and all of it's free. So I would highly encourage, especially any of the band directors in the room, to go and check that resource out. It's a fantastic resource that the President's Own has supplied to the profession.
All right, next, tell a story. All of your music should tell some sort of story, whether it's one that you come up with your students, or you come up with it on your own, or sometimes, you know, a lot of music does have just a story with it. But kids tend to be more expressive when they've got an image in their head that they can imagine. For example, there might be a beautiful, lush moment that you say is the end of a romantic comedy when they finally realize they love each other and it's a big kiss. You know, kids eat that up. Also, if you use really strong adjectives and make sure that, you know, they write them in their part. And I don't mean like this music should sound happy. I mean, you should say this music sounds ecstatic, right? If you use those strong adjectives, that's going to help them to be even more expressive.
Excellent. Here we are. There we go.
All right.
So yeah, go ahead, Paulette.
Okay, so what better, more expressive, beautiful piece, one of my very favorites. This is the Shenandoah by Frank Tekeli. This one is a good way for us to look at some scores and apply the laws. So take a look at it and think about what laws we could use in here in these first few bars of Shenandoah, and go ahead and pop those into the chat when you're ready.
And as a reminder, if you need a refresher on some of the stuff, because I know we're cruising through this information, Paulette has shared the PDF that has all of the laws on it. So you can go ahead and reference those.
All right, well, while we're waiting, I definitely see a spot where we can know our role. If I'm the horn or the euphonium solo, you know, I'm the melody, and everybody else needs to make sure that they're playing a support role rather than the main event.
And if you look in the second complete measure on beat 3 in the trombone 1 part, there's a unique entrance there. And so that's a great example of new entrances are special, and that can be brought out. And likely your first trombone player is going to play that and think it's wrong when it's actually a correct thing to do.
Awesome, Caitlin. Yes, bring out the moving lines.
Very good. Fantastic.
Yeah, those clarinet quarter notes in measures 3 and 4 really propel the phrase forward. So yeah, absolutely, I agree. Nice job.
Absolutely.
All right, let's keep going.
Fantastic.
Chris and I are very excited about this. I don't know if you can tell. We're trying. We're moving.
We are probably, for the sake of brevity, going to move through these last set of laws rather quickly, so we have at least a minute or two at the end to answer any questions that anyone has. Sure. So be deliberate about your breath. For anyone that works with wind players or choral students, you know, it's extremely important that they breathe deeply, that they breathe correctly and musically, and this can save a whole bunch of problems and cause the music to be much more artistic. And in addition to that, you want to make sure as a conductor that you're facilitating a really great breath with your hands, with your gesture. In general, as somebody who teaches undergraduate conducting and sees a lot of young students try to do this, I think most conductors don't use enough space and or they move too quickly through the breath. And just go up, come down, and have it try to mimic what gravity does, because that'll make it really predictable and easy for your students to breathe. Moving on.
All right, so articulation is style. All right. So your style is almost entirely based on your articulation, the shape of your notes. So all members of the ensemble must commit to that style. This goes back to the beginning, middle, and ends of notes. We got to make sure that we've got it on point. Really good activity you can use is put them one on a part, listen for the stylistic articulations, and then move it around the room, because then you can pinpoint who might, if you hear like a little bit of muddiness, you can figure out who it is, so one kid at a time on each part. Another good way to check it, make sure that we're matching our articulations and being stylistic, is to play 4 beats of a melodic figure down the line, and everybody should sound exactly the same. The only thing that should change is the color of the tone between the instruments, and yeah, that articulation is style.
Absolutely. So next, this is one of Paulette's favorites, so I'm going to let her take this one. Go
okay.
ahead, Paulette.
All right. So this is my friend Fat Albert. And so, especially when young players play, if we've got a leap, a lot of times, the dynamics are going to go flatline, 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 flat. Okay, right. So because the loud note, the high note, it pops out and it scares you. So before the note before the leap, we need to energize that note. So I tell the story of Fat Albert, because this gets burned into their minds and they never forget. So I say, close your eyes and imagine that you're at the pool, and Fat Albert comes up to the diving board, and he is looking very beautiful in his bathing suit, and he wants to dive off the diving board. So what is he going to do at the end of the diving board before he hops to get all of Fat Albert up and over into the water? And then the kids go, oh, well, he's going to push down, right? And then he's going to go up. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, so that's what you're going to do. The note before the leap, before you go up to the high note, you got to dig into it. You got to push down. You got to energize it. All right. So Fat Albert it, guys. And then, of course, it's perfect. It's wonderful. The angels in heaven are happy because we don't scare people with our high notes. So Fat Albert.
Excellent. So sequences should have dynamic direction. It's really typical for students in a sequence to just play everything flatline, but that's a really easy point where this kind of ties in with the other law that we had about change something on the repeat. Sequences are often the same thing, but just in a slightly different harmonic treatment. So this is a great opportunity for you to crescendo. And if you have a sequence, figure out where the sequence starts, help your students understand where the sequence ends. And if they gradually crescendo through all of that, making each statement of the sequence more insistent, you will be shocked at how much more expressive it sounds with a simple adjustment to the dynamic of saying, play each statement of the sequence a little bit louder. We're going to go from here to here. So there's that one. Moving on.
All right, this is another one of my favorites. So a gentle piece needs gentle ends to our notes. So we've got to teach a tapered release. And, a tapered release is not the easiest thing for kids to comprehend. So one of my favorite things to do is the tapered release gesture. So, and you guys can do this with me. So just take your hand, and what we're going to do is we are going to assign a member of the ensemble to each one of my fingers. All right. So if you are a flute, clarinet, oboe, first trumpet, you're going to be my pinky. All right. If you are second and third clarinet, alto saxophone, you're going to be my ring finger. If you are French horn, second, third trumpet, I'm sure you guys can kind of gather what's going on here. I'm going down the score, right? So our alto, lower alto voices are going to be my middle finger. And then the trumpets always make like a nice little joke about how the second and third trumpets are my middle finger, typical trumpets. And then, so then my pointer finger is going to be my tenor voices, my trombones, my euphoniums, right? Tenor saxophones, bass clarinets. And then the last one, my thumb, is the tubas. All right. You can apply this to orchestra. You can apply this to choir, but your lowest voice is your thumb. So we go, okay, guys, as my finger goes down, you have to stop playing your note. So you go nice and slow. Cool. Good. That was a great tapered release, but it was really long. All right, let's go a little faster. Okay, better. Good. All right. And then finally you get them to, and that's a beautiful gesture. And so now you can look at your kids and you can go, you don't even have to, you could be in the sight reading room. You don't even have to tell them. They'll see the hand like, okay, we're going to taper. Here we go. And taper. And it's perfect every time. All right, let's keep going.
Excellent. So wear stage makeup. Any of you who've ever done theater know that you have to put on a lot of makeup like this individual here in the picture has done. And it looks really intense up close because you're amplifying a whole bunch of features. But when you're sitting 30 rows back, it looks normal, but it amplifies all the features of the character that's on stage. And we have to ask our students to do this a lot. Anyone who's ever recorded before, you know that you feel like you're doing all these hyper expressive things, and then you hear the recording and it sounds pretty flatline. So we have to teach our students that they have to amplify any sort of contrast that they're doing within their music making. So, so this, because of time, we want to make sure that we get a chance to offer anybody to ask questions. But this would be great to, now that we come back kind of full circle to the Beethoven excerpt, you can take this and see how many different laws you could apply to this particular excerpt. And that's a strategy and an exercise we would suggest any of you go ahead and do as sort of a refresher and just sort of lock in all of this information from this clinic. But at this time, we want to open up the chat. If anybody has a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand to speak if you have that.
Yep. And while we're waiting, this activity would be really great to, like, you could present this Beethoven 7 excerpt to your students and ask them just like, all right, somebody play it for me, you know, and don't tell them anything about anything. And then play them the recording so they can hear, oh, wow, that's so beautiful. Like I thought it was going to be boring. And then it's a good way to introduce the laws. And I'm keeping my eyes on the chat. I just want to make sure we've given you some ideas on how to reinforce the laws, some activities you can do, which you can check those out. Those are all in the handout. Some further reading, got to plug some of these books. Principles of Musical Performance by Jim Matthews was like the inspiration for all this research for me. You can actually get that on Kindle, and it's like an easy read, and it's an easy to refer, and he'll go through some of you know, the musical laws and the musical ideas we talked about, and give you even more activities that you can use. All these books are awesome. Put them in your library. Note grouping is a hard read, but it's fabulous.
It's a good one. Yeah. Well, if there aren't any chats, any people in the chat, we would just want to say thank you so much for attending. We hope that this was helpful for you, and hope that you can use some of these tools to help your students and you achieve higher levels of artistry with your ensemble and pass the musical decision making onto your students. So we wish you a great weekend, happy, safe holiday season, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.